In the media analysis video space here on YouTube, there's no lack of videos on a certain cartoon family. Videos praising their writing, their family dynamic, lamenting the genius that once was The Simpsons. The prevailing mindset in this space is that the early days of The Simpsons were a masterclass in screenwriting, animation, and character. People praise The Simpsons for creating a family that feels right, that has heart, and that made us laugh on a moment-to-moment basis weekly. But despite this being the prevailing consensus across the internet, I believe there's a show that builds a better family. An animated show that has the most human, most realistic family on TV right now, and maybe even ever. That show, of course, is Bob's Burgers. And it only makes sense, right? We're all in agreement that The Simpsons is a shambling zombie of its former self, so the space for Best Animated Family is open once again. And while neither Lauren Bouchard nor the lead writing staff of Bob's Burgers cite The Simpsons as a direct influence, they've all been involved in some of the most successful mainstream live-action and animated series of the past few decades, including The Daily Show, Third Rock from the Sun, King of the Hill, and Frasier. All shows that coexisted and mutually influenced America's favourite yellow family. The team behind Bob's Burgers have taken everything that previous sitcoms, both real and animated, have taught and learned, and used it to perfect the modern family sitcom. And I'm sure there's some analogy about a secret recipe here, since, you know, it's a restaurant-based sitcom, so if you could imagine I made that joke and leave a comment on how great the cool secret burger joke was, I'd feel a lot better if you did that, thanks for that. But back to the shows themselves. To me, there are two main opportunities for a fictional family to feel human. The first is when they're at rest, interacting in a low-intensity environment. For example, a weekday evening in the living room. Convincing small talk between friends or family is incredibly hard to do right, and in most cases comes across as stilted or awkward. Unless it's done for effect, bad-sounding dialogue sticks out like a sore thumb and ruins a good piece of media. Nailing this, however, is invisible. Since natural-sounding dialogue sounds, well, natural, you don't notice it. It just feels normal, mundane. So as an audience, it's hard to know when a show is doing it right, unless you actually sit down and look for it. The second opportunity we're going to look at today is conflict, specifically how two characters talk about and resolve their conflicts. As, spoiler alert, we're going to be comparing Bob's Burgers to The Simpsons, I've decided to choose scenes that focus on the relationships between Bob and Louise, as well as Homer and Lisa. Younger daughter argues with the dad, it seems comparable, right? Specifically, we'll be looking at towards the end of the episode when they reconcile. Does it sound like an actual conversation? Do they sound like they're listening to each other, or just waiting for their next line? More importantly, does it sound like they're just trying to wrap up an episode so the next one can start from the equilibrium? We need to see how the characters act when their flaws are on show, when they're owning up to doing something wrong, for them to truly feel real. It's why the perfect family, quiet, dinner scene, you know that horror movie trope? It's why that's a horror movie trope, because it feels off when everything's perfect, because real people aren't perfect. In fact, to make it easier for me, and because I'm kind of lazy, I'm going to be using the same episode for both the first and second criteria. To represent The Simpsons, I'm going to be using the episode Lisa the Greek. It's a classic episode in which, to quote this little Google widget thingy, Homer cashes in on Lisa's uncanny knack for picking football game winners. You all remember that one, right? It's a good episode, isn't it? We'll be comparing this to Bob's Burgers Spaghetti Western and Meatballs, which again, quoting whatever this thing is called, Bob and Gene start watching spaghetti western films but alienate Louise in the process. Gene takes pointers from the films on how to deal with his arch rival at school, and Tina takes out her aggression. Focusing on Homer and Lisa's relationship along with Bob and Louise's nets us some lovely parallels to work off of. We'll be using scenes of the father-daughter duos happily watching TV together as the at-peace scenes, and as for the conflict scenes, in The Simpsons we'll be using the two scenes in which Lisa calls out Homer for his selfishness, and Bob Burgers will be using the scene where Bob, Gene and Louise are trapped in a slide and Louise confronts the two about them abandoning her. You know, typing that out and now again reading it, it sounds a little bit bizarre, but it makes sense in context, I promise. The Simpsons scene begins with Lisa on Homer's knee as they count down in unison to the final whistle of the game. This endears us to the relationship they've quickly found while watching the game together. The announcer reads the final score and Lisa is set down on the sofa, to which they cheer, again in strange unison, as Lisa unloads some exposition onto the viewer in a rather clunky way about winning $50. Homer then spins a yarn about gambling being okay in the Bible, and Lisa uncharacteristically seems to nod along after taking very little convincing. This to me made me notice a pattern of how transactional the show is. Lisa, despite being the moral compass of the family, always striving to be honest with herself and her family, simply nods along to Homer's idea to lie by omission to her mother, simply because the scene and the plot of the episode requires her not to know about it until later on. I've been rewatching The Simpsons recently, and this has struck me multiple times. Every scene in the show is attempting to do so much that there's no opportunity for the characters to just be, to interact with one another and endear the viewer to them. Every personality trait of the family members has only been introduced to push a plotline, and more often than not is pushed aside in the next episode, with the exception being Lisa's vegetarianism. Anyway, Marge walks in and asks how their day was, and they look at each other and giggle, hiding a secret together. This final giggle solidly sells the newfound connection better than anything else in the episode, as it's a truly human moment between two people. Other than that, the counting in unison, it's very mechanical and robotic, to be honest. Like, the perfect unison, while expressing their connection, it feels too perfect as I see it. Compare this to the Bob's Burgers scene. It begins with Louise stating, "Burn unit commence," and the two taking in turns to make terrible jokes about the terrible shows they find late at night. Bob finds an old movie he used to like as Gene comes in and asks about a larger plunger. Bob insists they watch the movie and Gene takes a seat between the two, much to Louise's dismay. She tries to push him off the couch, but to no avail. The dialogue here feels far less mechanic than the previous example, with Bob interrupting himself by changing the channel over him saying, okay, you first. In The Simpsons, the TV never make noise over the character's speech, making the entire scene feel less natural. Once they begin making jokes for each other, the only response is "burn," rather than the obligatory laugh. This to me feels incredibly humanizing, as establishing this is a long-running tradition for the two characters, and they've probably heard each other's jokes before. When Bob finds the banjo movie, he quickly, again, talks over Louise, asking her to suspend burn unit. He's clearly very flustered and unprepared for this interruption, and he stammers over his words slightly when he explains the movie to Louise. This feeling of unrehearsed dialogue to what is obviously a scripted line makes Bob feel like a real person. Gene's entry into the scene is less than realistic, however it's still endearing to him as a childish character, as he proclaims he's preparing for later when he asks about a bigger plunger. He and Louise also behave like typical relatable siblings once he sits between them, and she's seen putting all of her weight into attempting to throw him off. This scene feels like a genuine family who have all had interactions like this before. Louise and Bob are totally desensitized to each other's brands of burn, so they don't laugh, but they shout burn anyway, because it's what you do, it's burn unit. And they've all heard Gene's weirdly overthought and vaguely toilet-themed thought processes so much, they don't visibly react to his query at all. And from a comedy standpoint, they don't have to, because their lack of reaction only makes the scene funnier. So chalk that up to 1 point firmly in the Bob column, shall we? And let's move on to our second examples. We'll start again in The Simpsons in a scene that starts promising with some human-sounding dialogue from Lisa. She's excited to talk about hiking with her dad and sells it with a comment about the tire fire, which is a very nice joke for the audience. Homer's response highlights his ignorance and selfishness as he totally blows her off, disregarding the connection they just made to go bowling. Lisa's unhappy response is followed by an equally ignorant and selfish retort about how the next football season is only 7 months away. So far this scene is far less transactional than our previous example, with dialogue that seems real enough despite Homer's cartoonish ignorance. From here on out though, it seems to play like a series of talking heads where each character gets a special moment with a close-up and their personal reaction/joke about Homer's selfishness. Lisa launches into a reactionary monologue that she perfectly times to finish a beat before she starts crying. The camera then cuts to Marge, who gives a stern motherly telling off that's characteristically matter-of-fact, and is then interrupted by "Go to hell!" as everyone turns to Bart, who is playing with a swearing soundboard that Homer bought him earlier in the episode. All of this feels, well, they're not catchphrases, but it perfectly encapsulates the characters in such a way that this could be like an advert for the show to prime you to knowing all the characters before the show starts. Simply put, it doesn't feel real. Everyone gets their jab in, nobody's in tense silence. It's just weird how not weird they are about it. Moving on to Bob's Burgers. In this scene, Bob, Louise and Gene are trapped in a slide, running from angry men who wish to fight them. As we zoom in on the slide, they're talking over each other to try and get a modicum of comfort, as Bob hurries to reiterate that they're politely declining a fight rather than hiding. Gene confidently and without hesitation agrees with him, and we're not sure whether he's being sincere or sarcastic. Bob attempts to continue justifying his position until he's distracted by a fart. Look, I didn't say the show is perfect, okay? But the family's reaction to Gene's fart is immediately blaming it on him, and he immediately apologises. There's no awkward denial or passing the buck like every other sitcom would do. No, they've been in this situation hundreds of times as they breeze past it. Louise then hushes everyone as she says she can hear them, and Bob visibly panics. Louise goes gotcha, and Bob snaps at her, demanding an apology for her stirring the pot the last few days. Louise finally demands an apology for being abandoned by the two, and Bob, who was previously quite angry, is taken off guard and his tone immediately shifts to one of apology. Gene takes a moment to make an offhand quip about slide voices, but this doesn't detract from the conversation at hand, as again, they're used to his weirdly thought out there comments. This is immediately followed by Bob quipping in and commenting that the family have lame names midway through Louise's demand for an apology. And again, this not only does the previous example, they're used to each other's quips and stuff so they can breeze past them, but it also teaches the viewer where Gene learned to quip like this, and it does all of this without taking away from the seriousness at hand. The men apologise and Louise begins to tear up, again circling back around to the gotcha when they notice. She pretends she's not really upset because she's a child, she doesn't know how to deal with these emotions. In both the examples, the Belchers feel more like a real family who know each other and love each other and could exist in real world, whereas the Simpsons feel like they're hurrying to get a specific quirk or punchline out or otherwise drive the plot forward. Now, I'm not saying that this is a bad way to make a show, it's clearly working out for them, but to hear over and over that classic Simpsons is this family dynamic that's perfectly balanced, it just grates on me when there are other examples that are better and they're broadcast on the same goddamn channel. You don't even have to look far to find them. I'm going to briefly touch on how I think this happens by comparing the writing styles of the two shows. The Simpsons has a typical writer's room, wherein scripts are worked on as a group for hours and sometimes days, until every joke has been punched up, every opportunity has been taken, and every scene has been fully optimized. These pages are then given to the voice actors who record them solo in a sound booth. This is the way most cartoons are done, so it's not really worth going into detail about this, but Bob's Burgers, however, is done slightly differently. They still use a writing room, but the specific process is quite different.
Usually, the entire writing team does not outline each episode together. They break into smaller groups of 3 or 4 writers to figure out the beats of the story. When the writer feels confident she has the beats of her story, she goes off to write the outline on her own. The outline will then be presented to Bouchard, Dauterive, and maybe a few other writers, who will weigh in and make sure the outline is super solid before the writer goes off to write the script.
Since the story ideas are created in smaller groups, the story beats feel more personalised and less of a string of opportunities to get jokes in. The writer's room do have the opportunity to punch up the script afterwards, but then it gets handed back to the original writer to rework once again. So you end up with a punched up jokey script that still manages to be personal and keep the original vision of the creator. And then the recording. Bob's Burgers is recorded in an ensemble, meaning the cast is there in one room. Well, in theory. Half the cast is from New York, half the cast is from LA, so the producers hook up what is essentially a very expensive Skype call in order to maintain the ensembleness of it. But why bother with all this? Well, ensemble recordings allow the cast to improv off each other more effectively, as they can read each other's facial expressions and bounce off them. This results in dialogue that's a little messier, with a little more crosstalk, but everything feels more natural and, well, human. In any scene where they're talking over each other, it's like a family would. Louise and Gene are bursting with excitement, Linda's getting caught up in the fun while Bob just wants to get things done, or vice versa, sometimes the two swap places. In the early episodes, you can even hear the occasional voice actor stifling laughter in the background as the room improvs around them. But what does it matter? Why should I care that the cast of Bob's Burgers talk like real people and the Simpsons don't? Well, when you create true human characters, you create flaws that are genuine and that are relatable. Take Tina, for example. Tina has become an icon for millennials and Gen Z people, where the monotone groans with awkward matter-of-factness. To quote Bob's voice actor H. John Benjamin and series creator Lauren Bouchard from an Esquire interview,
"It's not because she's funny. She is, but that's not it. She's honest and vulnerable, and she's allowed to be who she wants to be. And she's funny within that."
I know why there are these characters on TV who don't seem to like each other. People want these quick, set-up punchline jokes. They drive these scenes along very easily, but the disapproving dad stuff, it becomes a trap. It's a really understandable pitfall, but the family dynamics on Bob's Burgers are a little more earned, a little more fair.
And when you've got a family of people who are flawed humans that communicate like flawed humans, it's going to be way more relatable from the audience's perspective. They're going to click with these characters and everything will hit harder. The emotions, the laughs, and in the later season's own way, the lessons. First season notwithstanding, Bob's Burgers has a very warm and accepting attitude towards things like trans people, bisexuality, and exploration of self. Simply put, it's a good show, and it deserves more love. Thanks for watching what was basically just a video about how much I love Bob's Burgers. I didn't mean to rail so hard against The Simpsons in that one. Comments are going to be fun, huh? If you liked this video, the like button in the comment box are eager for you to click and type all over them, and that came out wrong, but we are sticking to it. Subscribing would be awesome too, and if you want to join the ranks of the cool names you see on screen, then check out my Patreon. Links to that and all the other social medias are in the description below. Special thanks to the fresh cheese bags of the month, Ethan Safron, Karl Raade, Kozmosaur, NeuroticAnarchy, Magpie Magus, and WhatWouldJediDo. Love you, bye.